Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast, where we discuss Stoicism, the ancient philosophy of living the good life. I'm your host, Bryce, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Benny and Brendan. We are here to help you apply Stoic wisdom to your everyday life, no matter what the obstacle you may be facing, whether it be work stress, relationship issues, or just the general ups and downs of life. Stoicism has something to offer us all.
Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast, and this lovely day today. I'm here joined by Brendan. Brendan, how are you doing?
Oh, Benny, I am fantastic. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm very excited to present our guest today. It's Meredith Alexander Kunz. We have an author, an editor, a communication strategist focused on science, but for us, more importantly, focused on Stoic philosophy as well, or life philosophy. She's been published in many things like Newsweek and in the San Francisco Chronicle. But she has a blog, the Stoic Mom, where she talks about parenting, about modern life and Stoicism, all of them combined. Definitely check that out from the get-go. You can find her now on Substack, if I'm correct. Co-active coaching. She wears many hats, she's told us, and we're looking forward to that. And one of the main things we have her on right now is because she's a co-author of Beyond Stoicism, which she wrote with Massimo Pigliucci and Gregory Lopez. And we'd love to hear about her journey and about why Stoicism or philosophy is important in her life and why she feels like that's something that people need more in this world today. But I don't want to fill things in too much. Meredith, welcome to the show. If I missed something, please let me know. But how are you doing?
Doing really well. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today with you both.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you and about the book. But also I wanted to know, I think most people who listen to those who are practicing Stoicism or philosophy want to hear how you started this journey and what it means to you. So I kind of wanted to start out there as well with you. Like, how did Stoicism enter your life, and how do you feel it can really help you live better?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I was always interested in ideas, and I did education around history and literature and political philosophies, and I thought, oh, there's so much to learn in these areas, and also kind of I was always interested in the past and in the ancient past, in just history in general, and. I was also a writer, and so I would do a lot of reading and writing. But I came to a point where I had my own kind of personal moment of seeking after I had two daughters. So I had two kids, about 2 years apart, and my husband and I were suddenly faced with being parents, and we really wanted to be the best parents that we could be. But modern parenting is really tough. And, here in California, there's a lot of pressures on parents to kind of do really, a perfect job in our parenting. I think it's just, there's so many emotions and there's so many kind of demands of it. And yet you also want to find a way to help your kids become good people. It's not just the pressures or the stresses. It's also kind of like, how do we help our kids develop a good character, become good, independent, ethical human beings, right? So all of that. And as I started to think about it, I was really searching. I was interested in mindfulness. I was interested in various wisdom traditions and religious traditions, and I would read about philosophy. And at one point, I started to come across modern practitioners of Stoicism. I was a bit familiar from my studies of history with Epictetus and other folks, but when I saw at one point I saw Massimo Pigliucci, my co-author, had an opinion piece in the New York Times about Stoicism and how to be a Stoic, and he really emphasized this is not about having a stiff upper lip. This is something you can actually put into practice, not suppressing your emotions, but in fact, kind of coping with them in a really healthy way and being able to find the agency and the independence and drive to go forward. And I thought, wow, this combines so many things I'm interested in: ancient ideas, history, a way to live that is bringing ethics and sort of self-actualization into our lives. I thought, oh my gosh, I really need to know more about this. So I started reading about it. I mean, when I was a teenager, I remember reading, the lives of the Caesar, the 12 Caesars. Like I already had an interest in it, but when I got into modern Stoicism, I realized, wow, there are people really making this modern for our lives today, and let's learn how to practice it. So I immediately started to think about how can I put this into practice for my parenting. I had these 2 young kids, and I was pretty, I was anxious about kind of doing the right thing and also other people's judgment. I mean, as a mom, you go out there, you take your kids, people are always staring and wondering, oh, what's going to go wrong there. And so using Stoic principles immediately started to help me. And then I realized it was also something I could teach to my children. And that's just been an amazing journey for me.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear, and we definitely want to hear more about the how it came to the parenting. And it's when we ask the question, and as for example, from my personal experience, it comes from this moment of like kind of not tragedy, but when things go kind of bad and you want to rediscover yourself. But for you, it started from like where your life changed, right? When you became a mom, and with your husband became parents, and that's a really interesting way of also looking from now. You have the responsibility for 2 lives to, like, I'm not a parent, but it's you have the responsibility to keep 2 lives safe. And how has this philosophy helped you personally in that journey as at developing yourself as a parent and as a mom?
Yeah, it's just been critical for me. I mean, there was recently a study in the US from the Surgeon General that said 41% of parents say that most days they're so stressed they cannot function. And 48% say that most days their stress is completely overwhelming. I mean, people just feel very stressed because, as you said, you have kind of these lives in your hands, and you want to do right by that, but you also feel, I mean, you want to help your kids, but you also kind of need to help yourself. So there's an element of one of these kind of clear Stoic questions of what's up to me and what's not up to me. In our society, there's kind of this, idea that everything a kid does is kind of somehow their parents' either fault or responsibility, which, we could unpack that for a while, but let's just say that having a Stoic framework helps a parent understand that, there are so many things outside our control about parenting, other people's judgment of how we're parenting, what kind of temperament our child has. Is our child naturally one way or the other? What kinds of challenges or learning differences our child might have, what kind of environment we live in, what kind of school system our child goes to, how many resources we have, other things, systemic issues in our society. And I think that, when you stop and think, okay, what is in my power? What is up to me? Then you get so much more clarity because you can essentially tune out a lot of these other things. I mean, we're in a very competitive area here in Silicon Valley, and you'll see parents going completely crazy. Oh, my kid's 3. I've got to, enroll him in like 4 languages and advanced math. And, oh, he needs to also be like a gymnastics star or something, or, start getting private coaching for baseball or something. I mean, it's just people are driving themselves and their kids crazy. So it's a way to kind of be able to say what really matters. And what matters is developing our character and raising our kids to become independent human beings who can make good choices. So that's the other thing I love about Stoicism. One of the mantras I go back to is I say, stop, drop, and question your impressions. I tell my kids this. It's something that's kind of humorous to me, and they laugh at it. But it's actually true because we're constantly surrounded by, these impressions. And the other thing I say is don't believe everything you think, because there's so much we're, being told by our society, our culture, our community here that is just leading us to become, part of just a major rat race. And instead, let's focus on these things that really matter. Plus, by following a Stoic method, you can help your kids become more autonomous and learn to make their own choices. If you're an intensive parent, a helicopter parent, and you're always there making the decision for your kid, they don't learn how to do it themselves. And then they up in a situation where they're, let's say, in college and they can't really function. So there's a woman who used to be a dean at Stanford University, Julie Lythcott-Haynes. and she's a really interesting person. She's written about kind of uh, how to raise a child, how to raise an adult, a child who'll be an adult, and how to become an adult for young people. Because at Stanford, she was able to see a lot of students who couldn't really, they were having trouble functioning and making basic decisions because their parents had always been there doing it for them. So our goal, my husband and I, as parents, is like help our kids become independent beings who can make good choices, use this idea of questioning their impressions and say, what's really true here? What are really my goals? And develop their own intrinsic motivation. Because if your motivation is always from outside, your parent, your coach, your teacher, your, someone, you don't develop your own interest and your own way of motivating yourself into the future as an adult. So that's also been really important to us. And, our kids have explored all kinds of topics. Like I never thought I'd have a daughter who is fascinated by quantum physics and quantum computing and is like working in a lab in a university. I mean, I didn't tell her to do this, so it's just really interesting where this will take you, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. No, like that this aspect of applying Stoicism to parenting is so interesting to me because I was drawn to it personally because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in business, and it seemed like a framework for leadership to me, like in many aspects of how to be a good leader, which I've always, I want to be. And I've just recently started thinking about that as it applies to parenting. I'm not a parent, but that is a goal of mine in the future with, but you are like you're a leader for these little ones. And so thinking about it that way is always very cool. And then you talked about too, this internal motivation, I want to kind of like double click on that a little bit as it relates to children. First of all, if you could, if you're comfortable sharing, how old are your children and how did they kind of develop their relationship with Stoicism, and how did you sort of harness and grow that internal motivator?
Yeah, yeah. So my kids are now, I have a 19-year-old, which is shocking to me, and my younger daughter recently turned 17. So she's still in high school. So they're, basically almost young adults at this point. And I think it's been really interesting for them because even as young kids, we try to offer them some types of choices and help them learn how to make a choice. Even if it's just simple, like, do you want blueberries or strawberries? A little like a toddler kid. Um, and, there's a lot of situations where children need to learn to kind of emotionally regulate around their choices and around how they act with others. And I think a lot of, even before I think I sort of formally adopted Stoicism, I was already trying to help my kids develop their character and their way of interacting with other children so that they would, and one thing I love about Stoicism is the idea that there's these twin pillars of human nature. We have rationality and ability to think and think through things. And then we have sociability, ability to be able to, be in community, be a partner with other humans. So those were things we started to try to teach our kids at a very, very young age. And even like kind of the basic principles of like the golden rule, for example. I mean, I still always remember a time my daughter was playing at her friend's house and she was just a little kid, 3 years old, and just really refused to leave their home and like just wanted to keep playing and having so much fun. But meanwhile they're over there cooking dinner, like trying to do their chores, like trying to actually live their rest of their lives after the fun time was over. And I there were so many things that I heard myself saying to her, like, well, if you were really hungry and needed to eat dinner, wouldn't you like to, be able to have your guests go home and be able, just very simple, like ways of thinking about, placing them in the situation of making kind of an ethical or moral choice. It's even a small one. And as they got older, they were able to do this more and more. And kind of, we always tried to give them options. So, my kids have tried out many, many like sports, for example, or many different like arts and things like that. We gave them opportunity to be have enrichment of things they could try, but then ultimately wanted them to pick what did they like. I mean, my older daughter decided to do water polo completely on her own. I mean, she just happened to have a team at the school. I mean, in California, it's fairly popular. The public schools will have a team, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to try this. Great, go ahead. and she ended up really doing well with it and becoming a captain of her team at the end. Like, but it wasn't, we weren't there. They're hovering over her and saying, you need to do this, or you need to get out of varsity sport or something like that. And we're very lucky. Our kids they're very naturally curious. And I think we also developed that for them to the extent we could, to kind of just give them the tools to explore their curiosity, as opposed to define everything as you need to have this be an outward achievement and you need to be able to show you got a prize or an award, or that your teacher recognized this, but somehow follow your curiosity into things that you care about.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And for me, like, I'm from the Netherlands, and we don't have having all the trophies on the mantelpiece, and we are like, oh, you just go and enjoy yourself, right? And this is what my parents told us. They did tell us, like, oh, you have to play sports and you've got to try a musical instrument, and then at least for 1 year, and at least preferably team sport for the social interaction. Because I agree with you there, and I've lived abroad for 14, 15 years now, and I always tell my mom, it's kind of a curse for being good parents, because you've raised an independent kid and they kind of, leave the house. So it's like, I want to see you some more, right? But that's kind of the curse of like doing a good job. And then the child, in my case, I left home. And it's like, okay, we can, at the beginning with Zoom and all that stuff, it didn't work. I had to explain it to them. But so that's the curse. But it's a great thing to do, right? I feel blessed for having them. And they've always said, as long as you do something that you enjoy and that feels good for you, and then you have that, as you said, you leave that freedom for them to explore, to be curious, and to really explore what ticks for them, right? What really works for them. And I wanted to bring that to a broader picture, because as you see, like, your kids growing up, the different parts of the school system and everything, what do you feel that more parents could use in as they raise their children? You mentioned like the drive for success or prizes or whatever, or having a sort of specific, things in school. What do you think that parents could do a little bit more with as they try to raise their children in modern times?
I think that parents should be using the idea of questioning their impressions. So not just taking on the received wisdom of whatever community you're in. Oh, all the kids do this here, or if your kid doesn't do that, they're behind or they're not good enough. Or if your kid wants that, oh, that's, not great. So I think question your impressions around what other people are doing. And you don't have to do the same things. There are actually, I'm sure in your coaching, there are actually kind of Stoic mindset techniques we can use to kind of superpower our parenting around, pause, like ask what's really, really true. I like to turn to the virtues too. I like to, I write about that sometime in my Substack, kind of, asking these questions like, is it wise for me to do this? Is it wise for my child to do this? Is it fair? Is it brave? Kind of cultivating the virtues, is it moderate or temperate? I think one thing is courage. I have daughters. Like, traditionally, courage is something that's encouraged in men and males. But I would say that we should encourage it in women and in girls. And so I've always asked my kids those type of questions. It's like, well, kind of what would be the brave thing to do, or get them to try to ask themselves that question. Like, how can they push through something that seems like hard, challenging, stressful? Other people might not agree, try to help them, instill in them by even role modeling it, like writing a book when you have a full-time job, to me was a brave thing to do, just because it, took like weekends and evenings and all kinds of work. But like, I was like, I'm not going to miss out on an opportunity to do something I think is really worthwhile. That's just a minor example. But like, there's so many things where we encourage our kids to, like, even physically, like they did, go out there and do a polar bear swim, go out there and do the high ropes course. Like, try something that challenges you, that takes you out of your comfort zone. Because I think also for a lot of kids today growing up in a lot of environments that are where they have already they have enough food, they have a nice home to live in, if they're fortunate in that way, then they can be very comfortable and not really have to push themselves in certain ways. So I think asking them to go ahead and look, this is what it looks like to push yourself. My husband's out there doing like all the Spartan runs and, doing physical things, triathlons, like something that you can do to push yourself, and then something you can do to mentally push yourself. I mean, my daughter, who is now doing quantum physics and computing, like she said that, some of her hardest class in high school was physics and math, but like that's what she's, accept the challenge and go for it. So those are some things, but I do think Stoicism also has these intuitive principles about maximizing our own agency, and that I think that parents can do, and also they can encourage their kids to do. Like, oh, okay, so you have a really difficult teacher in history this year. That's okay. Just you do the best you can with that class, but maybe outside of the class, you could watch some videos about history. And actually, your teacher didn't really teach you anything this year, but could you watch some videos? What can you do and put it on your kid to actually learn something about this? And there's always other ways that we can kind of go and enrich ourselves and learn something and just push ourselves a little bit to keep going, even if like something is difficult. Now, my kids also had to deal with the pandemic. So I just want to mention that as like, the issue of adversity. I mean, my kids are lucky. They have a stable home life and stuff, but they did have to deal with their school shutting down, in my younger daughter's case, for sort of over a year. And she was in middle school. She was like a tween, like about, I don't know, 12 or 13. And my older daughter had just started high school. And this was like devastating for them because of the fact that they missed out on social interaction. They missed out on teachers teaching them. They were left in a void of, okay, you'll have a couple classes on Zoom, but you have to do everything yourself. And that's really hard for kids those ages, to just have to do it. And they felt very separated from their peers and from other people in the community. So I would say that was like an adversity that they had to learn to deal with. And it was very easy to just completely tune out and just, maybe go play video games or just look at Instagram or something. But they were able to get themselves out of that place eventually, but it was hard for them. And I think that that's something that we should also recognize, that the kids who are growing up today have had to deal with that.
Yeah, no, I think that is super important to remember, and I think also this idea that you're talking about, right? Like, I don't know, and this is just something I've kind of been thinking about, but like when I was growing up and I did something wrong, it was, go to your room and think about what you did, and that's basically parenting for at least in my life. And then later it felt like there was a shift where like when the kid did something wrong, misbehaved or whatever, it wasn't put it on the kid. It was, well, what's wrong with the school? What's wrong with the teacher? What's wrong with this? Let me point the finger at someone else. But what you're doing there when you're asking your daughter, hey, what can you do here? Yes, your teacher's not great in history, but what can you do here? It turns that back onto the internal, like onto the person, which I think is the thing that builds internal motivation. Is that idea of saying like you have a place here where you can make an impact in a positive direction, regardless of the negative, headwinds coming at you. So I really believe that has something to do with like as an internal motivator. Is that something that you see in your children as you've questioned them in that way, that they kind of self-motivate?
Yeah, I think they learn to cope with what's life is throwing at them. And I think this is very important because and I think that's one interesting thing about Stoicism I've also shared with them. The premeditation of adversity. There will always be something that's not how you want it to be. If you spend all your time and energy and mental, capacity focused on what's wrong with it and how awful it is and how you can't do this and how that stinks and how this person's getting in your way, you're losing all your energy to that. And you're also developing kind of like a victim mentality. So trying to get kids to see, yes, there's like some really bad things that happen, a lot of them, but how to find your own way of moving forward and way of sometimes moving around, or sideways or whatever it is. And I think kids can learn this. I think they I think if like from an earlier age, they kind of have an openness to being flexible. And I do think part of that's temperament. I think some people are born with more flexibility than others, but I think the more flexibility they can kind of learn and develop and grow into, the more they'll be able to, as you said, like just find some other path forward, and just do something that they never thought would maybe be interesting or beneficial. Like my younger daughter really loves math, and she's surrounded by friends who don't like math. So she's like, well, I mean, I could say I don't like math either if I want to be like everyone else, but instead she's like, well, actually, I really like math. So if they ever have a math question, I'm just going to help them. And if I can help a teacher, look, I'm going to be like a tutor for the math section in his class. Like I'm just going to do it because this is something that I care about. And literally she was telling me like math is the most classically hated subject. I'm like, yeah, it is, but guess what, we love math. So so it's just kind of things like that. And I do think they have to be strong with their peers, and they have to learn that it's okay to not do what others are doing.
Yeah, I think that those are important points, right? Where it's that personal following your nature, right? Living in accordance with nature, and that can be difficult, especially when you go to those teen years, those when you're and even for adults, right? For example, someone who's been drinking a lot of the years, it took me a lot. It was a big decision to quit drinking, mainly because of the opinions of others. Like everybody else is drinking, I should join them. And then the story with your daughter about maths, like she could have easily said like no one likes math, so then I know I like it, but I'm just gonna follow them. So that's really great to instill that in kids. And I like that, like I've been an educator for over 12, 13 years, and I can see that kind of moving the responsibility away from the individual to someone else, to external factors. But I kind of wanted to, because you have it, I've been following you on Instagram under the Stoic Mom, and you have the blog now, move to Substack, right? If I'm correct.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
what made you want to create this blog, and maybe and also just maybe like the role as a parent, right? It's there as a parent, but also you approach like modern topics like with social media and these things. Like what was the motivation for you to start writing that blog and start sharing those experiences with a wider audience?
Yeah, it's a great question, because even if you have these experiences, not everybody goes out and kind of shares about it. So, I like the question, and my reason for doing it is largely there's two reasons. One is I wanted other parents to feel less alone. And I wanted other parents to feel there was something out there that they could try that maybe they'd never even thought of before. Because as I think we've seen most Stoic practitioners have not been women and have not been moms and have not necessarily been parents, but or applying it in that way. So this is like, wow, here's a new approach you could try for your toolkit as a parent. So I wanted them to feel less alone. The other thing is I actually wanted to explore it more. And as someone who's been a writer my whole life, I felt it's almost like a public journal for me to say, here's how I'm exploring it now. And kids go through many phases in their lives. They go through all kinds of different experiences in different ages and different maturity levels, and what they need to learn when and how they behave. And it's almost like here's what I'm coping with, today or this week, as a parent, and how do I really think that through? So for me, it's also like kind of externalizing my thought process, and by doing so, really coming up with more frameworks around it and more like methods around how do I really try to be a Stoic mom? Because for me, it's very aspirational. It's not like it's every day I do this. I try to keep reminding myself this is how I want to be, because it goes against almost all of our culture and our society. Like, it's not what most people are doing. Like, I have a lot of parents in my community who, give your child choices and autonomy. Oh no, we have to like make sure our kids do this. So I think it's a little bit of being a rebel, but like maybe being a rebel in public that finds that community of other rebels. That is what I really like to do.
Oh, that's excellent. And this is so interesting, like this idea, I think one of the things that has been most lost from Stoicism as you look from the ancients to the modern day is this idea that Stoics were the first, school of philosophy to really start bringing in women. Like, philosophy is not just for men to study; it's for everyone to study, because we all have these challenges, we all have these issues. And over time, I feel like Stoicism has kind of lost that. And that, to me, that is like the communal, softer side of Stoicism, and that's why you have it now in these sort of realms where it seems very much like the stiff upper lip. It's all about resilience and just getting through adversity, and it's not. And we forget the community aspect and the softer side of it, and then that sort of thing. How have you, as you've written this blog for, I'm tailored towards mothers, I would imagine, mostly, or parents in general, but how has that been received by the community or by your readers, as far as these Stoic principles and applying them to being a mom?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like in the wider world out there, first of all, there's Stoic with a small s and Stoic with a big S, right? And Stoic with a small s has this totally other connotation around the stiff upper lip and not expressing emotions and being almost robot like. But then there's a Stoic with a big S, which, as you said, has this whole background to it. And I think part of the problem for Stoics today is we've kind of we lost all those ancient Greek sources, right? We only have reconstructions of them, like in Cicero and other places. There's not as much knowledge about what the original Greek Stoics said about how to maybe be a caring individual, how to be in community. We have some of it, like especially maybe in Marcus Aurelius. I mean, there's some, but I think, kind of to get back to your question, I think when most people would hear Stoic parenting, they're like, "What is that?" They have no sense of what I'm trying to get at. So there is a small community, and with some other Stoic parents, we had a Stoic parents Facebook group. So that does still exist out there, and I'm one of the co-admins of the group. It's not always that active, but I mean, there are people interested in this, and my goal is to spread it to more people. I plan to continue writing about it. I plan to write about it more publicly and share it with more people in my writing projects. And I would really like this to enter the consciousness of just more people. I think the people who do follow my work do totally get it. And there is a stream within Stoicism today that does focus on the more caring side. There's Stoic Care Organization from Brittany Polat, who is a Stoic colleague and friend of mine, and I've worked with her on some webinars and stuff where we try to bring in this more compassionate side of Stoicism, which we think is very integral. It just hasn't been as emphasized. So I think there's very much a place for that in this Stoic community and in the world of people who are interested in Stoicism, if we can kind of emphasize it more.
No, I definitely agree. And that's something that we've kind of experienced where, when we go in the masculinity sphere where you really have to burst the bubble of like, oh, the stiff upper lip, that's Stoicism, and suddenly come in like, no, this is real Stoicism. If you want to look at the philosophy, right? So that's the male side of it, but also we've been hosting spaces live on X for a while. We've seen so many women join there, and it feels like they are missing maybe the role models, maybe the voices out there, because it is quite male dominated. And we've had the fortune to have Brittany on as well. And that's why we are so happy and fortunate to have you on, because it is so important to hear that voice. And I've personally learned so much from hearing that perspective on the philosophy. And that's what it's all about, right? It's enriching people's lives. And as you pointed out perfectly, it's like we've lost so many of the text. So we owe it kind of to the world to maybe reinvent or make it our own. And that's why we need everybody to join in and to pitch in. And that's that's why we're grateful to have you on. And how do you feel about that, the women? Because I feel like there's more and more joining, right? We've experienced more women saying, oh, I like, Stoicism. That's something I didn't know I was a Stoic, right? Until I really heard it. What is your experience? And we'll wrap that, we'll start walking to the book, Beyond Stoicism as well, where you worked with Massimo and with Gregory and your input there. But that's for later. But how have you experienced being a woman voice in this modern Stoic community?
I'm also grateful for other women in this community, and both mentioned Brittany as one of them, and Sharon LaBelle. She's been one of my role models. Her translation of Epictetus in kind of the art of living is really, really remarkable, and she did this many years ago. I think her approach is just so both intellectual and also intuitive and exploratory and also caring. So she's another example of someone. But I do think there are many women out there who are interested in Stoicism and who want to really bring it into their lives. And I think once they get past that maybe manosphere or broicism aspect, then they start to see the principles of it. And I've also been really surprised. Sometimes I think because of some popularizers of Stoicism, and for example, like the Daily Stoic, you do see it more spreading more widely. And sometimes now I'll just mention it to people, and even to younger women. I was on like a group hike in Yosemite, and I mentioned how I was writing about Stoicism to this woman in her 20s, and she said, "Oh, I love Stoicism." And I was surprised at first because I hadn't encountered that many people in that group who were really into it, but she was, and we had a great conversation. And that's just, one example. But, even at my company, there's a lot of people. Sometimes I'll bring up my book and Beyond Stoicism, and I'll bring up my blog, and they'll say, "Oh, yes, really interested in this." And I've been following certain things. They'll follow certain podcasts or certain things online, and just get a taste of what Stoicism is. And I think once people get a taste, and once women see that, because I think women are particularly helped by, in our culture, there's just so much guilt that's being dumped on women, and so much pressure that's put on women to behave a certain way, and also to create these like perfect lives for the people around them, for their partner, their spouse, their, whoever they're with, for their kid, for their parents, for their boss. Like, there's a perfectionism, I think, that's placed on women in our culture, especially in American culture. I guess I can't speak as much for other cultures, but I see it as really very, very pervasive and quite destructive, because there's a whole, many women who believe I'm not good enough. I'm just not enough because I'm not able to do all of these things. I should be great in my career. I should be great in my relationships. I should be amazing on Instagram, and I should look perfect too. And it's just so much. And it's very, I just think it's toxic. So for women, when they start to see the messages of Stoicism and kind of the deeper thinking behind it, it's really liberating. And that's something I also write about. I mean, I think it's liberating for men too, but I feel that women that maybe, can tap into this because of the special pressures that they feel.
Oh, that's such a great point. And, it's something like as you're listing off, because like, of course, I remember these conversations coming up in like maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, where it was like, look at the, how we're displaying women on magazines and media and things like that. And all these pressures that come along with it. And all those things you were listing are all externals. They're all, you're being pushed by the external world to do something that you don't necessarily want to do. And, teaching these ideas of Stoic philosophy and how you can apply that to day-to-day living is really great. And, just to kind of, I guess, tap back to something you said earlier, it was, I always had Stoicism and viewed Stoicism as something that was a tool to be used when things were really hard, really difficult. I was going through something. It wasn't necessarily something I leaned on every day in the first, kind of few years I was aware of it or studying it. And it wasn't until I read Massimo's book where I was like, oh, this is the soft side of Stoicism. This is the daily living. This is the practical application of it. And that's when I really started to dig into it as a framework of life and less about just something I need when I'm struggling. But as we kind of shift over into the book and talking about that and how that came to be, I want to ask, where is it in your journey in Stoicism, of course, you're starting to use it practically in your life as you mentioned becoming a parent, and then eventually you start creating this blog, the Stoic Mom, and developing that community. When is it where that shift kind of turned to say, well, now I got to put this in a book and I got to, start doing this? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I've always been a writer, so I always use words to express ideas and to share them with the world. So that's just a natural thing for me. I've been a journalist. I've done communications for nonprofits, organizations, and companies. And so I always feel that there's a benefit to sharing more writing. So that's number one. And, I've always admired the books from Massimo. My gosh, these books are great. And Greg and Massimo had collaborated on a handbook for new Stoics, which I also really loved as a book. And I felt that, there was a need for more of these practical explorations so that people could just, as you said, like use it in their daily lives. And I thought that Massimo and Greg were doing an amazing job of this. So why not try to do more of it? And we thought about, we came together during the early pandemic, the three of us, to kind of have a conversation about this. And we thought about what kind of ideas would we want to be sharing out there that would really help more people. I mean, our motivation was strong to help more people be exposed to Stoicism, first of all. But then we kind of went into this other territory of, but there's also all these other ideas from classical philosophy and Hellenistic philosophy that aren't as widely known to the audience that's gotten really interested in Stoicism. And they have a lot of practical insights too. And some of these insights were really influential for ancient Stoics, like, for example, the Cynics, who were really kind of, in many ways, sort of a twin philosophy to Stoicism. And so we thought, this is a great opportunity to try to introduce a newer audience who's not academic and who's not studying philosophy necessarily in high school or college or university, but who wants to learn something about these other ways that insights from the classical world could apply to our lives today. So we had that discussion and we started kind of formulating our book proposal, and I got pretty excited about it because I also love this idea of going back in time and seeing what kind of made these folks tick, who developed these ideas, and how did they really live by them? And that's kind of the historian in me. I mean, I have a master's in history. At one point, I was going to become a historian, and then I went into journalism to be kind of like a modern day historian, to really see how do people, what motivates people today, and why do they do things, and why are they innovative today? But when we look back then, wow, the innovations and thinking that they came up with, thousands of years ago, it's so remarkable, but it's still so applicable today because, the basics of human nature and human desires and wishes and human, lives haven't changed in a lot of fundamental ways. So we just thought, well, wow, this is great. And so for me, it was almost like being able to go back and earn another master's degree to really dig into ancient philosophy. And my contribution to the book was more around the storytelling, the histories of these philosophers, their lives, and how that applied, how they tried to use the philosophy to actually live their lives, and kind of how we can be inspired by that. So I was super excited to do that. I had to do a lot of research and a lot of learning, but I'm definitely glad I did.
I'm glad you did as well, because it's such a lovely read, and the historical facts. And if you start reading Stoicism, you learn about a lot of these philosophies and you delve into deep, and we need a new Diogenes Laertes. So maybe, that would be a nice book for you to write about, to leave for posterity, and it'd be that kind of link between between those ages and whatever comes behind us. But I really enjoyed the different histories about all the philosophies, right? As you start with this Synarak and then Cynicism, and you go to Diogenes Laertes and of a Diogenes of Sinope, and that's where I liked how you focused it more on the role that his wife played, right? Was it Hipparchia? And I
Hipparchia,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah, and was that you did a lot of research for that as well? And because normally you read about Diogenes, right? But I like that angle and more of that, like, okay, how did that evolve? Could you share a little bit more about that? And as you mentioned, like the role of the history part of the book, which I also love. I love history, so thank you again for that. But
Yeah,
what made you
certainly.
kind of choose that angle?
Yeah. Thanks for asking about that. I mean, for in that particular case, we'd love to be able to understand more about women in philosophy in ancient times, right? And so it's true that there's limited sources on that. And we know that, women in those days were restricted in most cases of what they could do. But Hipparchia is this super interesting counterpoint to that. And, kind of defying her whole family and her culture and the perceived ways of thinking to want to become a cynic and want to marry Crates. And so we decided that, she really interesting the way she decided to live her life. And the fact that she was with Crates, I mean, we could have chosen to write about Crates because, of course, he was very influential on the Stoics, and he was one of the teachers of Zeno. Who was the founder of Stoicism. But we felt that Hipparchia, the way she lived her life, was so interesting and remarkable, and showed that there were women philosophers and women who truly lived by their philosophies in that era. So I find her extremely inspiring, especially how she just kind of said F you to her society. Because, I'm sure that must have been incredibly hard. It's hard to do today. But back then, I can only imagine that, not having role models for a woman who essentially decides to, almost they lived almost as homeless people, kind of just on the streets, trying to share their philosophy with people and just to really live by it. It was just a very radical choice. So we said, she was a rebel for life. And I find that to be so, in a way, it gives me courage. So when I need to go against, the common wisdom on something, or, speak out, even just in my work, when I'm working at a company, or when I'm dealing with, something where just everyday life that I want to speak out against something or advocate for something. Having role models like that, I think, is really powerful. So that's why we were really glad to include her in the book. We also have another woman in the book. Hypatia is the last of our bio sketches in the book for Neoplatonism. And we find that Neoplatonism may be hard to live by today, since we don't have maybe it's a little mystical and a little hard to understand how you might live by it. But the role model of Hypatia has been very powerful for women. I mean, there's a philosophy journal named after her. She's kind of a character in movies. She's someone who was a mathematician and philosopher and teacher, and really went out there and gave public lectures, was respected for her ideas. Unfortunately, now she's mostly remembered for, her death, which was an awful thing, that she was killed. But it's also very important to remember that there were these folks who could be role models for their intellectual lives and their courage and their advocacy for their ideas.
Oh, very nice. And as you were doing this and kind of going through, and of course, as someone who's interested in history, I'm sure that was very exciting. And I think that's, by the way, just a thread of people who are interested in Stoicism. There seems to be a draw from people who find history interesting and look backwards sometimes. There seems to be, because this is not the first time I've had this conversation with someone who was like, oh yeah, I liked history, so I found it this way. But anyway, that's a sidebar for later. As you were putting this together and doing this research to find the histories of these different philosophies, how did that change your relationship with Stoicism? I mean, I've always considered myself, very much almost 100% a Stoic, but as I've learned more, that 100% has dropped down to, 80, 70. How did your relationship with philosophy in general, or Stoicism specifically, change as you were kind of going through this book?
Right. Well, we do explore 13 different schools of philosophy. And so that was a lot to think about, how these could resonate with me and with folks reading the book. In our book, we have practical exercises, and those are ways you can actually try out living like these philosophers for a week or longer, however long you want. And I think it's been interesting for me to consider, um, which ones of these would I want to put into practice more in my life? I mean, I find that there's aspects of a lot of these philosophies that are so interesting and appealing. And even though I'm definitely not an Epicurean, when I started to read about, life in the garden, at the Epicurean garden of, communing with your friends and talking about ideas and just having almost like a spa day, being able to just have that community. I was like, wow, because I do feel that something that's missing a lot of times in our modern world is community. And so even by having this conversation, I feel we're building community right here, which is amazing. And so like something like that, like, of course, Stoics had that too, but it's a reminder, I think, that certain of these philosophies prioritized some aspect, and maybe for the Epicureans it was building these communities of shared desire to avoid the pains and stresses of the world and to share ideas and come together. And maybe that can be part of my life. That's something where maybe I'll remember that there's actually a role model for that, or there's a that elevates my desire to come to community about ideas with others as more than just, oh, it would be nice. It becomes sort of like, wow, there's a precedent. And maybe it also goes back to my interest in history. Like there's a historical precedent of people who really not just did this, but they formed these sort of almost like commune, like little communities throughout the ancient world, and they were just highly celebrated at the time. And that's just one example. As I mentioned before about Hipparchia and the idea of cynics, that to me, it's that maybe that sort of trait of being like super bold and brave and like talking back to power and like owning your own agency of like, I'm just gonna do this, I don't care what other people think, and I'm gonna offend people, but so what? It's kind of like realizing, again, you can elevate those wishes that you might have to something that is an actual practice. So I have found it to be like super, super interesting. And even like, I remember growing up, there was a lot of talk about like relativism and stuff. And we talk about relativism in the book. And it's not just like, oh, a lazy relativism of like, oh, nothing's really true or something. It's like, oh, let's actually find ways to explore these different perspectives like Protagoras did, and like let's try to see if we can figure out what maybe what's more evidence for this or that. So I think that there's actually useful practices in all of these things. So I don't believe that there has to be one single orthodoxy, even though the way I practice my practical philosophy is definitely rooted in Stoicism.
All right, that's wonderful to hear. And for me, Stoicism is what speaks most to me. That's how when I first read the Stoics, and they spoke to me. But after reading, Beyond Stoicism, it shows you that there's so much more, right? And it shows you the foundations of Stoic philosophy, but also where we are from now, right? You talk about Socrates, but even going to pre-Socrates, especially there at the end when you talk about the Pythagoreans. Although there's little left of it, but it shows you that kind of transition and that we build on from the past history and the evolution of thinking. And what was the kind of what kind of surprises did you find when doing the research, and what other nice, or maybe some some interesting facts or things that you really enjoyed for figuring out and finding out, because it was an exploration for yourself as well. It's like this treasure hunt for wisdom, and I kind of wanted to see what kind of nuggets did you find here and there.
Yeah, I loved learning about all these different philosophies, and there's just like countless things I discovered that were so interesting. Um, we also looked at skepticism a lot, and that was something I really wasn't very familiar with. So learning about academic skepticism, which many people associate with Cicero, and we talked about Carneades. I mean, I was, so amazed when I saw, here's someone who, Carneades was, it came out of Greece, came out of Athens, but in the Roman era, he went there to kind of argue against being fine. That he was sort of a political emissary to Rome, and when he showed up, he gave a public lecture about justice for a crowd of Romans, and young people. They're like, this is interesting. So one day he said, justice is natural, and the gods want it, and let's all be just, and let's all be fair. And then the next day he came back and he gave a second lecture and said, actually, justice is not really natural. Like it's just it's just an argument we make. And in fact, what's really important is sort of, power, and it's all relative, because, what's just in one society is not what's just in another. And what's believed here is not what's believed there. And even the Romans have just used these sort of as excuses. And I mean, it's just, imagining someone going up and I mean, I think it's documented enough that we think it happened, That was another thing in the book, is like how, as sort of, someone who's been trained as a historian, how much is enough to say that this probably happened. Of course, we had to use some poetic license and to fictionalize a bit, like, and come up with some more dialogues. But the dialogues for that chapter with Carneades, and the academic skeptics, it's actually from Cicero. So most of that's true. Even when he questioned about women, should women have rights to inherit property? Like, why aren't we fair to women? And I thought, is that something they actually said back then? I'm really glad. Yeah, apparently they did. Because there was some debate about the laws about what women could inherit and so on and so forth. So that was one I was really like, wow. And throughout the book, and Pyrrho too was an interesting guy. He was also a skeptic, and we think he might have been influenced by very ancient Buddhists when he went with Alexander the Great's court over to India and to areas in the Middle East, and probably learned something. And so the whole thing was suspending judgment, and so we can't really know what's true and what's actually happening out there. So just don't maybe kind of believe anything in a way. And, it's really hard to actually live your life that way. I mean, there are these funny stories about how he nearly walked off the side of a cliff because he didn't believe the sense data about what he saw in front of him. So he had to have friends like restrain him from, basically constantly getting into danger. The only thing he did avoid was a dog trying to bite him, because, like, he said, well, I can't be perfect. I had a natural reaction. But it's just so interesting because, again, it's like, these are people we can relate to. Like, these are people who had real lives. And I think I just love going back and thinking, what would it have been like to think about these ideas? And also remembering that they were all asking these huge questions. And they came up with different answers. But just the fact that they were asking the huge questions is critical. And I think we need so much more of that in today's world. And that's something, like, I will always, always advocate for. Like, ask questions, raise objections, raise ideas, find out what's actually happening. And so I love just being able to explore that from all these different angles.
Oh, that's such a cool story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Meredith. It's cool because I sometimes look at Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca from their writings as like these guys that just they got it all figured out. And it's good to hear that there was some trial and error going on in the philosophy world of let's see if this works. Okay, maybe not. And that's like, because that's what I do in my regular life. So it's very cool to like you said, kind of make that connection back to the the ancients, and still that like picture that Marcus paints in Meditations of like, reminding yourself that people are still just having birthday parties. They're dying, they're fighting, they're eating, they're doing this and we're still doing those same things 2,000 years later, and 5,000 years from now, people are going to be still doing that, hopefully. Right. So it's very cool to have that connection. And as we kind of wrap up here and in the conversation, before we pass it back to you and find out where people can connect with you and all those sort of things, I do just want to thank you for not only coming on here and sharing your story with us on the Via Stoica podcast here, but for continuing to just grow Stoicism, bring it into more people's lives, apply it to things like parenting and other aspects of life, so that this is just a philosophy that, like you said, we just want more people to be exposed to and take the nuggets from it that they like, and then move on. So thank you so much for the work that you've done to do that and grow Stoicism. But if you do want to tell the audience where they can find you, how they can connect with you, now is the time.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. And thanks to you also for, spreading the word about Stoicism. And back to what I mentioned before, like this whole idea of so many people who they just think they're not enough or not good enough. Stoicism is a way to just find your inner goodness and find your inner strength. And let's just keep talking about it and hope that more people will be able to adopt that, to be able to make a positive difference in the world. So advocate of that too. So here's the book, Beyond Stoicism, and here's the three authors there. You can find this book is published by The Experiment. We have a webpage on The Experiment, but you can buy it really anywhere that books are being sold, online. It's in a lot of bookstores. I was excited to see it in a few stores the past couple weeks, even as far as Mumbai. So please go ahead and check it out. Actually, in Mumbai, it looks like this, because I think they're selling the UK version, according to our friend. So also Live Like a Philosopher is the second title of the book, What the Ancient Greeks and Romans Can Teach Us About Living a Happy Life. And you can find these, that's on the website of the publisher of this book, which is Headline Press, but also anywhere books are sold. And it can be ordered from independent bookstores and stuff like that too. You can, and also I just wanted to put in a little mention of, we mentioned a little bit before we started recording, is I'm also involved with coaching. Coactive coaching, I think, is a really interesting method. I think it's aligned enough with Stoicism that people who are interested in Stoicism may also find coactive coaching interesting. I just became a certified professional coactive coach and hope to build coaching into my portfolio even more to help people with their self-leadership and to help also working parents, because I find that parents who are working while raising kids are also having a lot of special challenges that they deal with. So, feel free to kind of reach out to me about that area. I am on Substack at The Stoic Mom. Please use the as well. The Stoic Mom is a Substack I've been running for a while. I also have the stoicmom.com, which is kind of like all the legacy blog posts. You can also find me on X at The Stoic Woman, and on Blue Sky, The Stoic Woman as well. And I have a personal website, meredithkunz.com. So you can find me in many places. And I really appreciate your interest. And thank you so much. And, everybody who's listening, I appreciate you and your interest in these areas.
Yeah, and don't forget the Instagram, right? You're on Instagram as well.
Yes, right. Instagram, the Stoic Mom Instagram. Yes, this is a channel I've been growing more lately. Thank you for mentioning it, Benny. So please follow me on the Stoic Mom on Instagram and Threads too.
Yeah, well, I've been following you there, and it's nice to see like the books, and there it is, and that must be such a great experience to see your book in a bookstore like that, So
I was excited, yeah.
Yeah, it's been great having you on, and please do follow Meredith and check out all the work that she does, because it is important and it is something that really matters, especially in these times that we live in. So we really appreciate you for what you're doing, and thank you for being here and giving us some of your precious time to share your journey and to mention, to talk about the book Beyond Stoicism. Definitely check it out. I definitely recommend it. And thanks again for being, and also for the coaching. That's something that we also do, the Stoic coaching. So who knows? There's a lot of great opportunities there with Stoicism and coaching. But thank you again for being our guest.
Definitely, thank you so much. Thank you both for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.